On our honeymoon, my husband whispered, "You're not worth this sweet. My ex was better in bed." I said nothing. I just swapped our return tickets. He woke up to a bill, a note, and no way home. My reflection in the restaurant's mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. Designer dress that Corey had picked out, hair styled the way he preferred, sitting perfectly still while he ordered for both of us. When had I become this person? The realization hit me just as he leaned forward and whispered those devastating words. "You'll never be enough." The mirror cracked something inside me, and I knew there was no going back to pretending this was normal. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories that matter. If you believe women deserve to be valued for who they truly are, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and clinking silverware, the kind of upscale place where every detail had been carefully orchestrated for perfection. Crystal glasses caught the light from chandeliers overhead, and the soft jazz playing in the background felt like a soundtrack to someone else's life. I'd been staring at that mirror for what felt like hours, watching this stranger in my body sit motionless while Corey handled everything. The wine selection, the appetizer choices, even the way I should sit. "The lady will have the sea base," he was saying to our server, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who kept glancing at me with something that looked like concern. "But make sure it's not too seasoned. She has a delicate palate." I didn't have a delicate palate. I loved spicy food, bold flavors, the kind of cooking that made your tongue dance. But somewhere along the way I'd stopped correcting him. It had started small little preferences he'd override with that confident smile of his. "Trust me," he'd say, "I know what you'll like better than you do." And somehow I'd begun to believe him. The server nodded and wrote down the order, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. I wanted to speak up, to say I'd actually prefer the lamb with the herb crust, but the words felt stuck in my throat. When had speaking my mind become so difficult? "And for wine," Corey continued, "we'll take a bottle of the Sauvignon Blanc. Something light and uncomplicated." That's when he said it. As the server walked away and the background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade, he leaned across the table, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper I'd once found romantic. But there was nothing romantic about the words that followed. "You'll never be enough." They weren't spoken in anger. There was no heat behind them, no sudden burst of frustration. They were delivered with the calm certainty of someone sharing a weather report. Factual, final, indisputable. Like he'd been thinking about it for months and had finally decided I needed to know. My hand froze halfway to my water glass. "What did you say?" "You heard me." His expression didn't change, still wearing that slight smile he used when he thought he was being helpful. "I've been trying to build you up, to help you become someone worthy of the life I can provide. But you're not improving fast enough." The words settled into my chest like ice. Around us, other couples were laughing, sharing stories, celebrating anniversaries and achievements. But at our table, time seemed to have stopped. I looked at Corey, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had his face become so cold? "This trip," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "this whole weekend, it's been a test, hasn't it?" He shrugged, cutting into his bread with precise movements. "Everything's a test. Life is a test. And you're failing." The mirror across from me showed my reflection again, and this time I saw what he saw. A woman who'd been systematically diminished piece by piece, until she was nothing more than a shadow of who she used to be. The dress I was wearing cost more than I used to make in a week, but it felt like a costume. The hairstyle, swept into an elegant chignon, wasn't something I'd ever choose for myself. Even my posture had changed, shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted down, taking up as little space as possible. When did I stop being me? I asked, more to myself than to him. "You were never really you to begin with," he said, taking a sip of wine. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. The person you were when we met, that wasn't sustainable. I've been helping you become someone better." The server returned with our meals, setting them down with professional efficiency. My sea base looked perfect, artfully arranged on the plate, but I couldn't imagine eating it. My stomach was churning with a mixture of humiliation and something else, something that felt dangerously close to rage. "Remember our first date?" Corey asked, cutting into his steak. "You ordered that ridiculous spicy curry and you were sweating by the end of it. You looked like a mess." I remembered that date differently. I remembered laughing until my sides hurt, telling him stories about my travels, feeling more alive than I had in months. The curry had been incredible, and yes, I'd been sweating, but I'd been happy. When had happy become wrong? I was being myself, I said. Exactly. He smiled like he'd proven his point. And look how much more elegant you are now. Look at this place. 3 months ago, you wouldn't have known which fork to use for the salad course. The thing was, he was right about that. I had learned which fork to use, how to order wine without stumbling over the pronunciation, how to dress for places like this. But in learning all of that, I'd somehow forgotten how to be the woman who'd once backpacked through Southeast Asia, who'd sung karaoke until dawn, who'd never met an adventure she wouldn't try. I used to like myself, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Corey paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. That's the problem. You liked yourself too much. You thought you were fine the way you were, but you weren't. You were rough around the edges, unpolished. I saw your potential, but you had to be willing to change. And if I wasn't willing? His smile faded slightly. Then you'd always be unworthy of anything real. Anything lasting. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of people who seemed to know exactly who they were. I pushed my chair back slightly, needing space to breathe. The mirror caught my eye again, and this time I saw something different in my reflection. A flicker of the person I used to be, fighting to surface. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. We haven't finished dinner, Corey said, his voice sharp with disapproval. People are watching. Let them watch. The words came out stronger than I'd intended, and I saw surprise flash across his face. I'm going outside. I walked through the restaurant on unsteady legs, past tables full of people who seemed to belong in their own lives, past the hostess who smiled automatically, past the valet who asked if I needed my car. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing, and I stood there on the sidewalk, finally able to breathe. Behind me, through the restaurant's windows, I could see Corey still sitting at our table, his attention already back on his phone. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't coming after me. He was probably relieved to have a few minutes without having to manage my inadequacies. And in that moment, standing alone on a street corner in Napa Valley, wearing a dress that wasn't mine and a hairstyle that made me feel like a stranger, I finally understood what had been happening to me. It wasn't love. It wasn't even improvement. It was erasure, executed so slowly and carefully that I'd mistaken it for care. The mirror in the restaurant had shown me the truth, but standing here in the darkness, I could finally see something else. The possibility of finding my way back to who I used to be. The question was whether I was brave enough to take the first step. I walked back into the restaurant 20 minutes later, my face composed and my breathing steady. Corey barely looked up from his phone as I slid back into my seat, though I noticed he'd finished both his meal and mine in my absence. Feel better? He asked, not waiting for an answer before launching into a story about the photo he'd just posted. 37 likes already. The lighting in here is perfect for my complexion. I nodded and smiled, but something fundamental had shifted during those 20 minutes on the sidewalk. While he continued talking about engagement rates and hashtag strategies, I found myself studying him with new eyes. Not as a wife trying to please her husband, but as someone gathering intelligence. Back at the hotel, Corey immediately began his nightly ritual, photographing every angle of our suite, adjusting the lighting, capturing the perfect shot of the champagne bottle the hotel had left as a welcome gift. He moved through the room like a director setting up scenes, completely absorbed in creating his online narrative. This place is incredible, he said, snapping another photo. The marble bathroom alone probably costs more than most people's cars. Here, stand by the window. I want to get a shot of us together. I positioned myself where he directed, letting him arrange my hands, tilt my chin, adjust my smile. But while he focused on his phone screen, I was memorizing something else entirely. The hotel layout. The way the hallway curved toward the elevator bank. The emergency exit sign I'd noticed near the stairwell. The pattern of when housekeeping made their rounds. Perfect, he said, already editing the photo. This is going to get amazing engagement. While he worked on his post, I excused myself to the bathroom. Instead of freshening up, I stood quietly by the door, listening. His habits were so predictable. Post photo, read comments, respond to the ones from people he considered important, ignore the rest. The process took exactly 14 minutes every time. I used those 14 minutes to think. To plan. To remember who I used to be before I became an accessory to his life. The next morning while Corey slept in, I told him I wanted to explore the hotel spa. He waved me away dismissively, already reaching for his phone to check overnight notifications. Whatever. Just don't book anything expensive without asking me first. I didn't go to the spa. Instead, I walked through every floor of the hotel, timing the elevator delays, noting which staff members worked the early shift, observing the patterns of daily operations. The concierge, Maria, greeted guests with genuine warmth but kept detailed notes about their preferences. The housekeeping supervisor, James, moved through the halls with military precision, checking each room off his list with careful attention. Most importantly, I discovered that the hotel kept detailed records of every guest, every room, every service request, including the fact that rooms could be booked under different names as long as you had valid identification. When I returned to our suite, Corey was in the shower, singing off-key while he used the expensive hotel toiletries. I could hear him through the bathroom door, completely oblivious to anything beyond his own reflection in the mirror. I pulled out my phone and switched to private browsing mode. My fingers moved quickly across the screen, booking a room on the 3rd floor under Sarah Mitchell. My maiden name, the name I'd carried for 28 years before I'd given it up for his. The reservation confirmation came through immediately, and I saved the details to a secure folder. "Babe, can you grab my black shirt from the closet?" Corey called from the bathroom. "The one with the designer label visible?" "Of course," I called back, but I was already slipping the new keycard into my wallet, behind my old library card that still bore my maiden name. Over the next 2 days, I perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. Corey never noticed when I excused myself to check on my backup room, or when I started carrying a small overnight bag disguised as a purse. His attention was always focused on himself. The mirror, his phone screen, the next perfect selfie opportunity. I watched him interact with the hotel staff, and what I saw made my stomach turn. He snapped his fingers at the housekeeping staff, never saying please or thank you. He complained loudly about the temperature of his coffee, the thread count of the sheets, the speed of the Wi-Fi. He treated every person who served him like they were invisible or worse, like they were inconveniences in his perfectly curated world. "These people should be grateful they get to work somewhere this nice," he said one evening, after berating a young room service attendant for bringing the wrong type of sparkling water. "It's probably the closest they'll ever get to luxury." I remembered a time when I would have been mortified by his behavior, when I would have apologized quietly to the staff and left larger tips to compensate for his rudeness. But now I just observed, filing away each interaction like evidence in a case I was building against the man I'd married. The breakthrough came on our 3rd night, when I realized that Corey's narcissism had made him completely blind to anyone else's actions. He was so focused on his own image, his own needs, his own reflection, that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. That evening, as he posed for yet another bathroom selfie, I swapped our keycards. Mine for his for mine. The plastic rectangles looked identical, but mine would no longer open our suite. His would only work on the room he didn't know existed. "Did you see how many likes that sunset photo got?" he asked, not looking at me as he spoke. "I'm thinking of becoming a travel influencer. I have the face for it." "You certainly do," I agreed, slipping his keycard into my wallet while he admired himself in the mirror. He never noticed. Just like he never noticed that I'd stopped wearing my wedding ring to bed, or that I'd been keeping my passport in my purse instead of leaving it in the hotel safe with his. Just like he never noticed that when I looked at him now, it wasn't with love or even frustration. It was with the cool assessment of someone studying a problem that needed to be solved. On our final night, I lay beside him in the king-sized bed, listening to his breathing slow and deepen. His face in sleep looked peaceful, almost innocent, like the man I'd thought I was marrying 3 years ago. But I knew better now. I knew that when he woke up, he'd immediately reach for his phone to check his notifications. He'd spend the first 20 minutes of his day scrolling through comments from strangers, basking in digital validation while ignoring the real person lying next to him. I memorized the sound of his breathing, the way his face looked in the dim light from the city outside our window, the feeling of sharing a bed with someone who'd never really seen me as anything more than a supporting character in his story. But I wasn't memorizing these details with love or nostalgia. I was memorizing them with certainty. The kind that comes when you know something is truly over, when you've moved beyond hoping things will change to accepting that they never will. Tomorrow I would put my plan into action. Tonight, I would lie here and say goodbye to the woman who had tried so hard to be worthy of a man who would never see her worth. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty but full of possibility. Full of the future I was about to reclaim. Dawn was still hours away when my eyes opened. No alarm, no sound from Corey. Just my body's internal clock marking the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for. The digital display on the nightstand glowed 4:47 a.m. in soft blue numbers. Beside me, Corey's breathing remained deep and even. One arm flung carelessly across the space where I should have been sleeping. I slipped from the bed like a ghost, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. Every movement was deliberate, calculated from the hours I'd spent mentally rehearsing this moment. The bathroom door closed with the softest click, and I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to wash my face and brush my teeth with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. In the closet, my fingers moved through the hanging clothes with surgical precision. The red dress Corey had bought for our anniversary, left hanging. The designer shoes he'd insisted matched my skin tone better, left in their box. The pearl necklace that had come with a lecture about appropriate jewelry for a woman of substance, left coiled in its velvet case. Instead, I pulled out the clothes I'd worn the day we met. Jeans that actually fit my body instead of the size Corey thought I should wear. A soft cotton sweater the color of autumn leaves that I'd bought myself for myself. Comfortable boots that could handle walking long distances. The person I used to be, hidden behind 3 years of careful curation. My small overnight bag. The one Corey thought was just a larger purse, held everything that truly mattered. My own passport, my credit cards and my maiden name, the emergency cash I'd been quietly setting aside for months without even knowing why. A photo of my grandmother that had nothing to do with Corey's vision of our life together. The silver bracelet my sister had given me for my college graduation, the one I'd stopped wearing because Corey said it looked juvenile. From the nightstand drawer, I retrieved the folded piece of hotel stationery I'd prepared the evening before. The message was brief, written in my own handwriting rather than typed. Not your burden anymore. I placed it carefully on his side of the bed, where he'd see it when he reached for his phone, which would be approximately 6 minutes after he woke up. According to his unvarying routine. I didn't write an explanation. I didn't detail the years of small cruelties or catalog the ways he'd diminished me. Corey had never listened to my words when I was standing right in front of him. He certainly wouldn't hear them in a letter. The hotel hallway was empty at this hour, lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows on the ornate carpet. My keycard, his keycard technically, opened the door to my secret room on the 3rd floor. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Airline confirmation on the small desk, a different suitcase packed with clothes he'd never seen me wear, a new phone with a number he didn't know. But first there was something else I needed to handle. Yesterday morning's breakfast had provided the perfect opportunity. Corey had been utterly absorbed in charming Rebecca, the young hostess who'd been assigned to our table. He'd asked her about her background, her dreams, her plans, showing more genuine interest in a stranger than he'd shown in me for months. While he leaned forward with that practiced smile, gesturing expansively as he shared advice about making it in the hospitality industry, I'd quietly reached across the table for his passport. He'd placed it next to his phone when the hostess had asked to see his identification for the wine tasting reservation. Always good to have documentation, he'd said with that laugh that used to make me feel special but now just sounded hollow. The burgundy booklet had slipped into my purse as easily as breathing. Now, sitting in my secret hotel room, I opened his passport and studied the photo. Corey's confident smile looked back at me, the same expression he wore when he was explaining why my opinions were wrong or my preferences needed adjustment. For a moment I felt something that might have been guilt. Then I remembered his words from dinner, "You'll never be enough." The guilt evaporated. At 5:30 a.m. I made my way to the front desk. The night manager, David, was someone I'd spoken with during my reconnaissance walks through the hotel. He was a kind man in his 50s who actually listened when people talked, unlike the day staff who seemed to exist solely to facilitate Corey's demands. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, recognizing me immediately. "You're up early." "I need to make some changes to our booking," I said, sliding the paperwork across the marble counter. "Mr. Blackwell will no longer be part of the reservation. I'll need him removed from all hotel services, including the airport transfer scheduled for this afternoon." David's fingers moved efficiently across his keyboard. "Of course. Should I prepare a separate invoice for Mr. Blackwell's incidental charges? That won't be necessary. I'm covering all expenses through checkout. It took less than 5 minutes to erase Corey from the hotel's systems. In their computers, he no longer existed as part of my reservation, my life, my future. The efficiency of it was almost startling. How quickly someone could be deleted from the official record of your existence. Will you need assistance with luggage? David asked. Just a taxi to the airport at 6:15. Already arranged. Is there anything else I can help you with, Ms. Mitchell? The question hung in the air for a moment. Was there anything else? 3 years of marriage, countless compromises, endless attempts to become the woman Corey wanted me to be. And it all came down to a few keystrokes and a taxi reservation. No, I said. I think that covers everything. By 6 a.m. I was standing in the hotel's service area, having taken the staff elevator that bypassed the main lobby entirely. Through the windows I could see the taxi waiting in the service drive, its engine running in the cool morning air. My suitcase felt impossibly light in my hand. Strange how little space your real life actually required when you stripped away everything that didn't belong to you. The service door opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, and I stepped into the morning air. Somewhere above me, his sweet Corey was probably still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that his world had just shifted on its axis. My body was trembling now, small shudders that started in my hands and worked their way through my chest. But my mind remained crystalline, focused on the next step and the one after that. The trembling wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The physical reaction of someone who'd been holding her breath for 3 years and was finally ready to exhale. I climbed into the taxi without looking back at the hotel. Not because I was strong, not because I was brave, but because I was finished. Done with being a supporting character in someone else's story. Done with trying to earn worth from someone who would never see it. The driver pulled away from the hotel and I watched Napa Valley scroll past the windows. Vineyards still dark in the pre-dawn light, hills rolling toward a horizon that suddenly felt infinite with possibility. The airport was a blur of movement and purpose. Travelers rushing toward departures, families reuniting at arrivals, the constant hum of announcements echoing through the terminal. I sat in the departure lounge, nursing a coffee that tasted like freedom, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. San Francisco area code. The hotel that I let it ring. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again. Same number. Then again. I could picture the scene unfolding back at the hotel, and despite everything, a small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my bag. Whatever chaos was erupting in Napa Valley was no longer my problem. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and 3 hours later, during my layover in Denver, I found myself logging into the hotel's guest services portal. The system still recognized my credentials. Sarah Mitchell, guest services account, access granted. The activity log told the story better than any novel. 7:23 a.m. Guest services call from room 847. Request for new keycard. Guest claims card malfunction. 7:31 a.m. Second call from room 847. Guest reporting that electronics in room appear to be malfunctioning. Request for technical support. 7:45 a.m. Security called to room 847. Noise complaint from neighboring guests regarding loud voices and door slamming. I could imagine Corey's growing frustration as he discovered that his keycard no longer worked for the room he thought was his. The gradual realization that something was very wrong. The moment he would have found my note, those 4 words that said everything and nothing, not your burden anymore. 8:12 a.m. Front desk call from guest in room 847. Requesting immediate transfer to guest services management regarding billing discrepancies. 8:18 a.m. Security escort requested for guest in room 847. Guest attempting to access elevator without proper keycard authorization. The mental image of Corey being escorted anywhere was almost too delicious to believe. For 3 years he'd moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied access, never had to explain himself to anyone he considered beneath him. 8:31 a.m. Manager called to front desk regarding Mr. Blackwell. Guest questioning billing charges for spa services, minibar consumption and room service from dates prior to his knowledge. This was where my preparation had been most thorough. Every service Corey had ordered for me. The massage I hadn't wanted, the champagne he'd insisted on photographing, The overpriced room service meals he'd selected without asking my preference had been quietly transferred to his name over the past 3 days. The spa treatment where they'd styled my hair the way he preferred? Charged to Corey Blackwell. The designer toiletries he'd insisted the hotel stock our bathroom with? Billed to his account. The itemized total was somewhere north of $4,000. 9:07 a.m. Guest services note. Mr. Blackwell requesting contact information for Ms. Mitchell. Request denied per privacy policy. 9:15 a.m. Guest services note. Mr. Blackwell claiming identity theft. Requesting to speak with hotel security regarding fraudulent charges. 9:23 a.m. Security note. Mr. Blackwell unable to provide valid identification. Claims passport missing. I couldn't help laughing out loud at that entry, earning curious glances from fellow passengers in the Denver airport. Corey's passport was currently in my carry-on bag, nestled next to my own like they were old friends. Without it, he was essentially trapped, unable to fly home, unable to prove his identity, unable to do anything but rely on the kindness of strangers. Something he'd never been particularly good at. Inspiring. 9:45 a.m. Front desk note. Mr. Blackwell requesting phone charger and access to guest services manager. Guest appears agitated and claims conspiracy. The conspiracy comment made me pause. Even in crisis, Corey couldn't accept responsibility. Someone else had to be to blame. The hotel staff, the billing system, the universe itself. The idea that his wife might have orchestrated his downfall would be incomprehensible to someone who'd never seen her as capable of independent thought. 10:12 a.m. Guest services note. Mr. Blackwell's emergency contact list accessed. Only one valid number remaining in system. That entry made my stomach tighten with something that felt like vindication. I knew exactly whose number that was. Bella Morrison. The woman Corey had been involved with before me. The one he still compared me to in those quiet moments when he thought I wasn't listening. Bella never would have ordered something so messy, he'd say when I chose foods he found embarrassing. Bella understood the importance of presentation. When he criticized my clothes, I'd programmed her number into his emergency contacts 6 months ago, after discovering she was the only person he'd ever spoken about with genuine respect. Let them reconnect. They deserved each other. 10:28 a.m. Security report. Mr. Blackwell requesting taxi to airport. Payment method declined. Guest asking for payment assistance. 10:35 a.m. Front desk note. Mr. Blackwell questioning contents of wallet. Claims items replaced without his knowledge. The wallet modification had been my masterpiece. While Corey slept his last night in our shared bed, I'd carefully removed his credit cards, his driver's license, his insurance cards, everything that gave him power and identity in the world. In their place, I'd left exact change for a local bus ride and a bright yellow business card I'd picked up from a law office in town. Divorce attorneys Silva and Partners, it read in bold letters. Specializing in high-conflict separations. First consultation 50% off. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it also the most honest piece of information Corey would receive that day? Without question. 11:02 a.m. Manager report. Mr. Blackwell escorted to lobby. Guest requesting to speak with someone in charge regarding billing dispute and missing personal items. 11:15 a.m. Lobby security note. Mr. Blackwell approached front desk in pajamas and hotel slippers. Guest claiming identity theft and requesting police assistance. 11:23 a.m. Police report filed. Guest claiming passport theft. Unable to provide secondary identification for report verification. The final entry was time-stamped just 20 minutes before my connecting flight began boarding. I could picture Corey standing in that pristine hotel lobby, the same lobby where he'd posed for countless selfies, wearing nothing but hotel pajamas and complimentary slippers, trying to explain to uninterested police officers why his wife's disappearance constituted a crime. For 3 years he'd wielded control like a weapon. He'd decided what I wore, what I ate, how I spoke, who I could be. He'd systematically dismantled my confidence and rebuilt it in his image, always making sure I knew exactly how much I owed him for the privilege of his attention. Now he was the one without power, without options, without anyone to blame but himself for the choices that had brought him to this moment. I closed the laptop and gathered my things as they called my boarding group. Through the terminal windows I could see my plane waiting on the tarmac. Destination. Portland, Oregon. A city where no one knew me as Corey's wife, where I could remember who Sarah Mitchell had been before she tried so hard to become worthy of someone else's love. As I walked down the jetway, my phone stayed powered off in my bag. Whatever happened next in Corey's story was his to figure out. I was finally ready to write my own. The plane to Portland could wait. As I stood at the departure gate, boarding pass in hand, something pulled me back from the jetway. Not revenge, I was past that. Not curiosity either, exactly. It was something deeper, more necessary. I needed to see this through to the end. 20 minutes later, I was checking into a small boutique hotel 3 blocks from where Corey was having the worst morning of his life. The Vine Inn was everything our luxury suite wasn't. Modest, genuine, run by people who seemed to actually care about their guests rather than their Instagram potential. My room on the 4th floor had a clear view of the Grand Harbor Hotel's entrance, and I settled into the window chair with a cup of coffee that tasted better than anything room service had ever delivered. From this distance, the hotel looked like a stage set, all marble columns and uniformed valets moving with choreographed precision. I'd spent 3 days in that world, playing a role I'd never auditioned for, and now I was watching it from the outside like a theater patron who'd finally found her seat. At 11:47 a.m., the show began. Corey burst through the hotel's revolving doors like a man fleeing a fire. Even from 4 stories up and half a block away, his agitation was unmistakable. Wild gestures, rapid pacing, the kind of frantic energy that comes when someone's carefully constructed world suddenly stops making sense. He was still wearing the hotel's complimentary robe, his feet shoved into flip-flops that had probably come from the spa gift shop. He pulled out his phone and jabbed at the screen with increasing violence. Whatever number he was trying to reach wasn't connecting. I watched him hold the device up to the sky, shake it, try again. The frustration in his body language was almost comical. Like watching someone argue with a broken vending machine. A hotel employee approached him, probably offering assistance, but Corey waved him away with the kind of dismissive gesture that had become second nature to him. The employee stepped back, hands raised in a gesture that clearly said, "Your problem, not mine." I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring both the warmth and the strange sense of peace that was settling over me. For 3 years, I'd absorbed Corey's emotions like a sponge. His anger became my anxiety, his disappointment became my shame, his chaos became my responsibility to fix. But sitting here watching his crisis unfold without feeling any urge to rush down and help, I realized something profound. His problems were no longer mine to solve. At 12:15 p.m., Corey's phone call finally connected. I couldn't hear his words, but his body language told the story clearly enough. He started pacing faster, his free hand gesturing wildly as he spoke. Then abruptly his shoulders sagged. The phone dropped from his ear and he stared at the screen for a long moment before slowly lowering his arm. Bella had answered. And from the look of defeat that washed over his face, the conversation hadn't gone the way he'd hoped. I found myself thinking about Bella Morrison for the first time in months without the sharp pang of jealousy that used to accompany her name. She was the woman Corey held up as his standard of perfection. Elegant, sophisticated, never embarrassing him with spicy food orders or loud laughter. But she was also the woman who'd left him. Whatever pedestal he'd built for her in his mind, she'd apparently had the wisdom to step down from it long before I'd figured out how. Maybe she'd hung up on him. Maybe she'd laughed at his predicament. Maybe she'd simply told him what I should have said years ago. Your crisis isn't my responsibility. Either way, watching his shoulders slump as he ended that call felt like witnessing the collapse of an illusion I'd been living under for too long. At 12:30 p.m., 2 figures emerged from the hotel security and a local police officer. They moved with the purposeful stride of people who'd dealt with difficult guests before, and Corey's posture shifted again as they approached. The confident stance he'd worn like armor for as long as I'd known him seemed to crumble in real time. I watched him try to explain his situation. Hands gesturing toward the hotel, then to his phone, then to his empty wallet. The officer took notes with the patient expression of someone who'd heard every possible excuse for why someone couldn't provide proper identification. Hotel security stood slightly apart, arms crossed, clearly ready for this conversation to be someone else's problem. There was something almost educational about watching pride dissolve so completely. Corey had spent our entire relationship positioning himself as the expert, the decision-maker, the one who knew better. He'd cultivated an image of control so carefully that I'd begun to believe it was real. But stripped of his credit cards, his identification, his ability to charm his way out of consequences, he was just another man in a bathrobe trying to convince strangers that his problems should become their priorities. The officer spoke to hotel security for several minutes while Corey stood to the side, no longer the center of attention he was so accustomed to being. I watched him check his phone again, probably hoping for a miracle call that would restore his sense of control. When none came, he simply stood there, looking smaller somehow than he had just hours before that I finished my coffee and leaned back in the chair, surprised by how calm I felt. Not triumphant. There was no joy in watching someone's world fall apart, even someone who'd spent years tearing mine down piece by piece. But there was something deeply satisfying about witnessing consequences finally catch up with behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. The officer eventually got into his patrol car and drove away, leaving Corey standing on the sidewalk with hotel security. After a brief conversation, they escorted him back inside, probably to continue the billing dispute that would keep him occupied for hours that I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just breathed long and deep, the kind of breath I hadn't been able to take in years. The relief that washed over me wasn't about revenge or victory, it was about closure. About finally seeing clearly that the man I'd tried so hard to please, to become worthy of, to build a life with, was just a person. Flawed, selfish, and ultimately powerless when his carefully constructed advantages were stripped away. For the first time since I'd whispered, "I do," at our wedding, I felt completely, utterly still. Not the frozen stillness of someone afraid to make the wrong move, but the peaceful stillness of someone who'd finally stopped running towards something that was never meant to be caught. That I picked up my phone and turned it back on. 17 missed calls from unknown numbers, probably all from the hotel. I deleted them without listening and opened my airline app instead. The next flight to Portland left in 3 hours. This time I was ready to board it. The afternoon flight to Portland lifted off just as the sun began its descent toward the California hills. From my window seat, I watched Napa Valley shrink below me until it was nothing more than a patchwork of green and gold, beautiful and distant. No part of me felt the urge to look back or wonder what Corey was doing at that moment. The curiosity that had kept me at the window of the Vine Inn had been satisfied, replaced by something much more valuable, complete indifference to his fate. The woman sitting next to me was reading a romance novel, the kind with a shirtless man on the cover that Corey would have rolled his eyes at. Mindless garbage, he'd called them whenever he caught me browsing the romance section at bookstores. But watching this stranger lose herself in someone else's happy ending, I realized there was nothing mindless about hope. Nothing garbage about believing love could be kind. Portland's airport welcomed me with the smell of coffee and rain, the casual friendliness of people who didn't seem to be performing their lives for an invisible audience. I took the MAX train into the city instead of a rideshare, sitting among commuters and students and people whose clothes looked comfortable rather than curated. The anonymity felt like a warm blanket after years of being an accessory to someone else's image. My Airbnb was in the Alberta Arts District, a converted loft above a bookstore that specialized in used mysteries and feminist literature. The owner, Janet, was a woman in her 70s who wore paint-stained overalls and spoke with the directness of someone who'd stopped caring what others thought decades ago. "Running away or running toward?" she asked as she handed me the keys. "Both," I said, and she nodded like that was the only sensible answer. That first night I ordered Thai food so spicy it made my eyes water. I ate it sitting on the floor of my temporary home, tears streaming down my face from both the heat and the overwhelming relief of choosing something simply because I wanted it. No consultation, no compromise, no explanation required. The next morning I walked to a coffee shop that served breakfast all day and ordered exactly what I craved: blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, crispy bacon, orange juice in a mason jar. The teenage waitress didn't comment on my choices or suggest alternatives. She just brought me what I'd asked for and refilled my coffee without being asked. Over the following days, I began the quiet work of remembering who Sarah Mitchell had been before she tried so hard to become worthy of Corey Blackwell. I bought books in genres he'd called beneath my intelligence level. I listened to music he'd deemed too emotional or professionally embarrassing. I laughed out loud at things that struck me as funny, without first calculating whether my reaction would reflect poorly on anyone else. The healing wasn't dramatic or cinematic. There were no montages of me learning to dance or cutting my hair or dramatically throwing away old photos. Instead, it happened in small moments, The first time I ordered wine at dinner without second-guessing my choice. The afternoon I spent 3 hours in a used bookstore without checking my phone. The evening I called my sister just to hear her voice instead of to ask her advice about managing Corey's moods. "You sound different," she said during that call, 3 weeks into my Portland exile. "Different how?" "Like yourself again. Like Sarah." I'd forgotten there was a difference. 2 months later, I was cooking dinner in my sublet kitchen. Nothing fancy, just pasta with vegetables I'd chosen at the farmer's market, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. But I recognized the tone immediately. "Why did you do it?" 5 words that somehow managed to contain all of Corey's bewilderment, his inability to comprehend that someone he deemed unworthy might choose to walk away from the privilege of his attention. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as different responses formed and dissolved in my mind. I could have written a detailed explanation of every moment that had led to my decision. I could have catalogued the years of small cruelties and systematic diminishment. I could have explained how his casual brutality had slowly erased the person I used to be until I barely recognized myself in mirrors or photographs. Instead, I deleted the message and blocked the number. Some questions don't deserve answers, especially when the person asking has never shown any interest in listening to the response. Corey had spent 3 years telling me who I was, what I wanted, how I should feel. He'd never once asked me what I thought about any of it. His question now wasn't about understanding, it was about control, one final attempt to make me explain myself to someone who'd never bothered to see me as worth understanding. My silence said everything that needed to be said. When I finally returned home to San Francisco 6 months later, people had opinions about how I'd handled my marriage's end. Some called me cold, calculating, cruel. They expected me to defend my choices, to justify why I'd left the way I did instead of trying to work things out like a mature adult. But I'd spent too many years defending myself to someone who was determined to find me lacking. I wasn't interested in doing it for anyone else. The truth was, I hadn't been cold, I'd been clear. I hadn't been cruel, I'd been decisive. And I hadn't taken everything from Corey. I'd left him exactly what he'd given me. An insult that revealed his character and a door wide open behind me that he'd been too arrogant to imagine I'd ever have the courage to walk through. In my new apartment, smaller than the one I'd shared with Corey but entirely mine, I hung the bright yellow divorce lawyer's business card in a simple frame above my desk. Tacky? Maybe. But it marked the exact moment I'd chosen myself over someone else's vision of who I should be. On quiet evenings, when the city lights twinkled beyond my windows and I could hear my neighbors living their own messy, authentic lives, I sometimes thought about that moment in the restaurant when Corey had whispered those devastating words. "You'll never be enough." He'd been wrong about so many things, but not about that. I would never be enough for someone who needed me to be less than I was in order to feel superior. I would never be enough for someone who confused love with control, partnership with performance. But I was enough for me. And after 31 years of trying to be worthy of other people's approval, that felt like the most revolutionary discovery of all. Freedom, I learned, doesn't always announce itself with fireworks and celebration. Sometimes it just exhales, quietly, peacefully, like finally being able to breathe after holding your breath for so long you'd forgotten what oxygen felt like. And sometimes that quiet exhale is the most powerful sound in the world. If this story of quiet strength had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah framed that divorce lawyer coupon, turning pettiness into poetry. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.